Hi, everybody. This is Ted. Welcome to our last video discussion for the class. This is week 14/15 since we're coming back from the Thanksgiving break. So for this last set of readings, I want to start us off with a quick recap of Freire's banking model that we discussed last time. So, if you recall, essentially, Freire's core argument is that education is not neutral. It's either used as a tool for liberation, as a tool for freedom, or as a tool for domination. And when we're talking about domination, we're essentially saying it's a tool for society to sort of reproduce whatever particular values that it has and sort of try to imprint them on students, as opposed to letting students kind of make up their own mind about things. And we can see that sort of evident in Freire's concept of the banking model of education, which is basically what he describes many traditional classroom settings or educational environments, and I think it holds true today, um, that education sort of functions as an act of depositing. It's sort of a one-way transmission from teacher to student. Essentially, the expectation is that the teachers are the ones that have the knowledge, and the students are the ones who are supposed to receive it. And the outcome of this process is that students are conditioned to become passive, adapted, and manageable by the education system. And so they're creative in critical power, critical thinking skills really are somewhat diminished. And Freire believes this sort of serves the interests of those who are often in power in society, who have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. Um, that's contrasted with Freire's other positive vision for education, which is problem posing education. And in this model, um, teachers are simultaneously students, and students are also thought of as being able to teach, which means essentially everybody should be able to teach and everybody should be able to be taught through a sort of dialogue process. It's sort of considered a much more level playing field within the classroom. So uh, that brings us to Bell Hooks's contribution. And one of the big concepts that she talks about just in this short reading that we do is the idea of praxis, which she defines as action and reflection upon the world in order to change it. So, we've had a lot of discussion of theory in this course, of ideas of what education should be for. Um, the intent of praxis, so to speak, is that you know you I'm you all as students have been invited to think about these things, and then the hope is that you will then take what you've thought and try to put it into action and to potentially live it if you are ever going to be an educator in a formal setting in a classroom or even in an informal setting. And I, I have tried to structure the format of this class. This is me taking, kind of the Wizard of Oz. I'm pulling the curtain back a little bit. The first part of this class, we read a lot of sort of philosophy of education, and my my feelings about this whole process is that we really have to have an idea of what education is for and who it is for, as educators, and that is sort of the very most basic building block. Um, the second part of our class, we focused more on critiques of contemporary education, because I think there are plenty of things that could still be improved. I wasn't necessarily trying to get everybody depressed or anything. So sorry if anybody, you know, wasn't the biggest fan of all those readings. And these last couple readings, I wanted to present us with a bit of a positive, constructive vision for what education can be. And that's in the form of Freire's problem posing education, but it's also going to be in the form of Hook's holistic, engaged pedagogy, which she argues is for self actualization. Um, Hooks's model really calls for teachers to act more like humans and to think of themselves less as conduits of a specific curriculum. You are not just an English teacher or a math teacher or a social studies teacher or a PE teacher. You are a person who is engaged in, a relationship with students. Um, and I think that engaged pedagogy really requires both teachers and students to be willing to share their own narratives and take risks. Be willing to try something that maybe is not going to work out. Be willing to kind of realize that you don't have full control over the process, and that's probably especially true for the teachers, because I think everybody's sort of conditioned to think about learning outcomes, or specific metrics, and that's probably going to come up for any of you who are expecting to um, have a position one day. um, but I think Freire and Hook's methods are ones that interpret education as being primarily based, in a sort of specific realization of freedom and agency for the individual, which um, really is one of the most kind of like it, it's one of those things that I think really makes an impact on students, and I think it can make an impact even on teachers and instructors as well. Um, I want you all just to think back a little bit to, um, even the first week of class where we talked about Labourie's goals for education. And if you recall, those were democratic equality, social efficiency, and social mobility. I think the constructive vision for educational pedagogy really most aligns with that democratic equality vision. Because in this version, in this conception, I guess, the idea of freedom isn't really just about the absence of constraints. The really crucial part, I think, for education is that, the practice of freedom really involves helping students build the power this, to realize their own agency, to be able to become fully fledged humans, fully fledged adults. That involves failing at times. That involves taking risks, like I said. Um, so I want to turn now to our second reading from Bizzell. And, we've talked about um, the idea that teachers should sort of be willing members, sort of more co-equal relationship with their students. Um, and I think Bizzell is trying to sort of reconcile that idea, particularly with, what does that mean for classroom management? What does that mean, in a normal American school? Um, and I think, the takeaway here, to give you guys the the short and sweet of it, is that how you teach is important. Traditional education models, and you're going to see these, you probably are familiar with these from your own experience as a student, that traditional education has an unequal power dynamic. Bizzell gives us three different forms of power for us to consider in the classroom. The first one is coercion, which is power exercised by the teacher for their own benefit and without student consent. And this is what critical pedagogy, like that of Freire and Hooks and Bizzell, all sort of reject. The idea that teachers are the ones that sort of have all the agency in the creative process. They're the ones who decide how they're going to teach, and maybe they get to kind of put a spin on things, but the idea is that students are just going to be expected to sit there and take what the teachers have to say. And maybe a teacher has certain standards. I'm sorry, it's too if a student is sick, or life has come up and it inconveniences the teacher in any way, well, that's too bad. The second model for power that Bizzell suggests is that of persuasion. And this, I think, is a sort of appealing alternative to coercion for many people who sort of realize some of the issues that are involved. I just had a cat fall, so hopefully that wasn't too loud. I'm gonna keep that. I'm gonna keep going. Persuasion involves is trying to replicate more of a democratic model where teachers and students negotiate as equals, but this kind of form of pedagogy has some limits because, Bizzell asked the question, what happens when a student rejects the sort of best intentions of the teacher to try to create like an inclusive space, tries to have a fair system in their class that privileges everybody. What if one of your students is like a bully? What are you supposed to do? And the third model that we're going to consider here that Bizzell provides to us is the idea of authority. And I think this is the key concept for us to be thinking about. This is sort of the resolution of the question. In the authority model, the teacher is expected to exercise power, but always try to do so with the student's consent. And that's supposed to be based on trust, that the teacher is serving the student's best interests. Authority might begin with persuasion, but it allows the teacher to guide students through difficult and even uncomfortable learning situations. you know, I would say sometimes, it, that the teacher might know what's better than a student, um, and I don't think that we should necessarily be too quick to shy away from that. So Bizzell gives us two practical examples for this kind of authority-based teaching. The first off is Bell Hooks, and we didn't get into the full extent of her academic work, but Bell Hooks has what she calls a confrontational teaching style, where she attempts to create space for marginalized students to come to their own voice, even when it's uncomfortable. And um, that could be because there may be pre-existing social situations. There may be specific dynamics around uh, like girls sort of speaking authoritatively, as opposed to sort of being more passive. In the past couple classes we talked about issues with boys being too rowdy and not necessarily conforming with potentially what is the traditional model of education. But in another hand, perhaps sometimes the confrontational style might help give a girl the opportunity to find their voice. And I think that's the intent from Hooks. The second model that Bizzell points out is that of Mike Rose, who recalls teachers who were, even in sort of a traditional classroom setting, the teachers were, even when they were sort of acting more authoritatively, sort of in a traditional style, the Mike Rose could tell that these teachers cared. And I think that is really one of the essential aspects of this authoritative model is earning the trust of students and modeling a sort of a personal investment to give students hope and the idea that somebody believes in them. And having that commitment to student growth, I think, goes a long way towards um, getting some leeway from students, even sort of like problem students. So I think key components for us to consider of this authority model are trust, mutual recognition, recognition from teacher to student, and thereby often students will recognize teachers as individuals. And then finally, that will give respect, and that goes both ways as well. So I wanted to end this video just by summarizing some of the themes that we've kind of discussed over class, and hopefully just to kind of give you guys um, a little bit of space to reflect on things. We've talked about, in the beginning of the semester, what is education for? Is it a public good? Is it a private good? Is it best understood as providing individual social mobility? Is it best understood as providing different sorts of workers necessary for all the different jobs that we need in society? Is it about creating good citizens? We've also talked about how a singular vision of education has affected Americans. Some ways, in some good ways, potentially. Positive ideas that have come from Thomas Jefferson's idea of democratic education and Horace Mann's Common School. But some negative ways as well, like the Indian boarding school and the inclusion of, you know, a Protestant Christian Bible at the expense of a Catholic Bibles, and sort of a having a restrictive vision of what uh, education means in America, has caused harm, I think, to many groups. Um, and I think, in this past couple weeks, um, we've sort of opened up a final question for us to think about, which is, should education be considered or intended for social reproduction? Are we just sort of supposed to be teaching students, specific things, and replicating our thoughts of what a good society or what a good student should be when we're making a good citizen, or should we be trying to prioritize self-actualization, critical thinking for students, and give them the tools to be able to make decisions for themselves? So hopefully, I give you guys some stuff to think about. Thank you guys um, for being part of this class. Um, this is my first time as an instructor, so hopefully you guys enjoyed me listening to me ramble, and hopefully my feedback on your papers and everything has been useful. So thank you guys so much for participating this semester, and I look forward to reading your final papers. Take care. Bye.